I ruled while everything collapsed around me. I wore the crown as if it did not burn. They called me sovereign. They never called me betrayed. I loved the one person I was never meant to love. And when the flames began to rise, I chose silence. Silence. That was my first sin. Inside the palace, morning shimmered with gold and polished marble. Servants moved like whispers. Along the corridors, silk brushed against silk. Porcelain trembled softly in steady hands. At the long table, we smiled as family. We passed bread. We passed judgment. Eyes lingered too long. Promises were spoken too sweetly. The throne stood at the end of every hallway, waiting, and so did he. The first thing the court learned about me was my stillness, not the kind born of wisdom, not the kind carved by patience, but the stillness of a man who has swallowed too many words and found that they sit heavier than armor. On the morning I was crowned, the banners above the eastern arcade bled crimson and gold into the winter light. The silk was so richly dyed it looked wet, as if some hand had dipped it into a fresh wound and hung it, to dry for all the city to see. Below the marble, steps were strewn with rosemary and white lilies, crushed beneath boots and velvet slippers until their perfume turned sharp. The air was full of incense and iron, sacred smoke and the cold truth of the sword I carried. I wore the crown as if it were a secret. That is what the priest whispered, later behind his jeweled cup that I did not lift, my chin high enough that I did not let the people drink their fill of my face. I did not smile, I did not weep. I stood as a painted saint stands on a chapel wall, hands steady, eyes too clear, mouth locked around a prayer that never ends. They wanted fire, I gave them control. The palace of Astor Hall was built for spectacle. Even in dawn, it glittered. The corridors were long rivers of polished stone, reflecting the chandeliers so perfectly you could believe another court lived. Beneath your feet, upside down and laughing, the walls were draped in tapestries dyed in violent blues and greens, hunts, wars, weddings, each scene threaded with gold so bright it caught the eye like a blade. Everyone in those halls was beautiful in the way court life demands beauty. There was not tenderness, it was weaponry. My Sister Seraphine moved through the galleries like a flame that had learned manners. Her hair, black as ink, was braided with rubies. She always smelled of rose water and something darker beneath it, like cloves. When she smiled, men forgot to breathe. When she frowned, women began to bargain with saints. My brother Lucian was different. He had the same bones as I did, the same sharp line of cheek and jaw, yet he wore his handsomeness like an insult. He laughed too loudly. He embraced too hard. He never entered a room without making it his. His doublet was often wine red, fitted so the court could admire the breadth of his shoulders and the ease of his arrogance. His eyes, gray, storm-touched, found mine constantly, as if he were measuring the distance between us with every glance. And then there was my mother. Queen Dowager Elowen sat in the high window seat of the solar each afternoon, wrapped in a mantle of peacock blue velvet that made her skin look paler, almost luminous. Her beauty had survived grief the way stone survives rain, altered but unbroken. She did not rule anymore in name, yet the palace still shifted according to her moods, like a tide answering the moon. She watched me closely from that window seat, as if my crown might slip and roll across the floor at any moment. "My son," she would say, voice soft enough to sound kind. "You look tired." I never answered. Honestly, in those first weeks I learned the true shape of my kingdom by walking it in secret. Not the fields and villages. I had ridden those as prince and believed I knew my people. No, I mean the kingdom within the palace, the kitchens where servants whispered like birds, the armory that smelled of oil and old blood, the council chamber, where the men who advised my father now advised me, with hands folded and eyes sharp. They were the same men who had stood beside my father when he died. There are deaths that end a life, and there are deaths that split a family down the middle. Clean as a butcher's cut, my father's funeral had been a procession of gorgeous misery, black, of velvet, black horses with silver-plated bridles, beard draped in cloth of gold, so the sun itself seemed trapped in mourning. The choir's voices rose up beneath the cathedral dome like pleading, and the people pressed together outside, faces turned upward in grief that was both real and rehearsed. I had stood behind the coffin with my siblings, my hands clasped so tightly I felt the bones grind. Lucian wept openly, his shoulders shaking, his face unguarded. Seraphine did not cry at all. She stared at the altar with such icy focus that some said later she looked like the statue of justice, blindfolded, unmerciful. My mother's tears were precise. They did not smear her coal. They fell glittering down her cheeks, like pearls dropped one by one for the court to count. And I felt nothing at first. That emptiness terrified me more than grief would have. Because it was not that I did not love my father. It was that I had been trained for years to anticipate his disappointment more than his affection. He had been a great king and a difficult man. His gaze could lift you into pride or crush you into dust. Even as a boy, I learned that the difference between praise and exile could be one wrong word. So I became careful. I became quiet. I became the sort of heir who listened until everyone else had spoken, and then spoke in a way that could not be used against him. That habit did not make me beloved, but it made me survivable. The court mistook my restraint for coldness. The council mistook it for weakness. My family mistook it for judgment. Only one person ever looked at me as if my silence were not a fault. Her name was Valeria. I first saw her at dusk in the chapel of St. Aureline, when the last light turned the stained glass into a riot of color, scarlet, emerald, gold, spilling across the floor like scattered jewels. She knelt alone near the front, a slim figure in a cloak the shade of dark honey, her hair unbound in soft waves that caught the candlelight. She was not dressed like a lady of high rank, yet she carried herself with a composure that made rank feel irrelevant. When she turned her face, I understood why men had begun to speak her name in the same tone they used for miracles and scandals. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was vivid. Her eyes were the color of deep river water, green touched with shadow. Her mouth was full, too expressive, as if it did not know how to lie. A small mark, no bigger than a grain of pepper, rested near her left cheekbone, making her seem more human than a painted court portrait. She rose when she noticed me, not with the startled haste of a guilty person, but with calm respect. "Your Majesty," she said, and her voice had the rare steadiness of someone who had learned to stand beside storms. I should have left. A king does not linger in chapels with women whose names will be whispered later. A king does not invite longing into his bloodstream, but I stayed. and in the colored, light with saints watching from glass and stone. I asked the simplest question that had left my mouth in daze. "Do you pray for the dead," I said, "or for the living?" Valeria's gaze did not flinch. "For both," she replied. "The dead cannot change. The living must." It was not a flirtation. It was not a trap. It was an answer that pierced me cleanly. I did not know then what she was to become in my life. I only knew that standing near her made the palace feel less like a cage. Later, I learned why that feeling was dangerous. Valeria belonged to House Marwyn, and House Marwyn had once raised banners against my father. Their rebellion had failed, but their punishment had been measured. My father had taken their lands and restored a fraction, as if to keep them, kneeling in gratitude and shame. Their men still served in our armies, their daughters still married into lesser nobility. Their name remained in the ledger of our kingdom, like a stain that could not be scrubbed, only covered with gold. A king does not love a Marwyn. A king does not even look at one too long. Yet when I returned to my chambers that night, the scent of chapel candles still clinging to my cloak, I caught myself remembering the shape of her mouth as she spoke. My attendant Corin was waiting by the hearth. He had been my shadow since childhood, lean, dark-eyed, always quiet enough to be overlooked. He poured wine into a crystal cup and watched me over the rim. "You went to St. Aureline," he observed. "I walked," I said. He did not smile. "The palace will call it wandering. The council will call it absence. Your mother will call it a symptom." "My mother calls everything a symptom," I said, and my voice sounded flatter than I intended. Corin approached, adjusting the clasp of my cloak with a deftness that bordered on intimacy. "They are afraid," he murmured, "not of war, not of famine, of uncertainty. Your father filled rooms with certainty, even when he was wrong. And I do not," I said. "You fill them with questions," he answered. "That is worse to some. In the days that followed, my hours were devoured by ceremony and council, petitions, punishments, pardons, the little daily cruelties of governing, a tax here, a judgment there, dressed in silk so they would look like virtue. At the council table, Chancellor Varick sat with his fingers steepled, his beard perfectly trimmed, his robes heavy with embroidered lions. He smiled, often. His smile never reached his eyes. "The western granaries are running thin," he said one morning, voice smooth as polished wood. "If we do not raise the levy, we shall have bread riots by spring." Marshal Dane, broad-shouldered and stern, struck the table with one blunt finger. "Raise the levy and you will have riots sooner," he growled. "The people cannot bleed coin when they already bleed sons." Across from them, Lord Halric, my uncle, my father's younger brother, leaned back in his chair as if the kingdom were a play staged for his amusement. His ringed hands rested on his stomach. His gaze lingered on me with a familiarity that felt like trespass. "You were always thoughtful," he said lazily. "A charming trait in a prince, a dangerous one in a king." Varick's smile widened. "His Majesty will decide." All eyes turned to me. This was where my silence became a theater. If I spoke too quickly, they would smell insecurity. If I hesitated, they would call it weakness. My father had thundered. I had learned to weigh. I set my cup down, the porcelain clicking like a small verdict. "We do not raise the levy," I said. "Not yet. We cut the excess at court first." There was a pause, thin, tight. Halric lifted a brow. Varric's smile faltered, then returned even gentler than before, as if he were soothing a child. "A noble gesture," he said, "but symbolism does not fill stomachs." "No," I replied, "but it reminds the people that the crown is not only a mouth to feed." Lucien, who had been invited to council as my brother, and, as a political necessity, let out a soft laugh. "Listen to him," he said, half admiring, half mocking. "Our quiet king speaks like a priest." I did not look at him. If I did, I might have seen something I was not prepared to name, because Lucien loved the court's attention too much. He loved applause, he loved victory, and he had always loved being wanted. My mother later spoke to me alone beneath the painted ceiling of the Sola, where cherubs chased each other through clouds that never changed. "You humiliated your uncle," she said, smoothing the sleeve of her gown. It was a deep violet today, threaded with silver, regal, unforgiving. "I corrected him," I answered. Eloin's gaze sharpened. "The difference is everything." "I am king," I said carefully. "You are king because your father is dead," she replied, and her voice was silk drawn across a bruise. "Do not confuse inheritance with invincibility." There it was, the wound, pressed, without mercy. My father's death sat between us, like a third presence. I had not yet learned how to mourn him. I had only learned how to replace him, and in the corners of the palace, behind the glitter and the music, behind the colorful tapestries and the sweet perfume, something else stirred, an unease that did not belong to grief alone. Whispers reached me, always dressed as gossip. The western marches were restless. A rival lord across the mountains had begun drilling men. At odd hours, the treasury's ledgers did not balance as cleanly as they should. Servants disappeared from service and reappeared with different masters. Faces I did not recognize lingered in corridors too long, and every time I entered a room, I felt the same thing, eyes weighing me, measuring whether my silence was strength or vacancy. At night, when the palace finally slept, I stood on the balcony outside my chambers and looked down at the city. Lanterns flickered in narrow streets. The river cut through the darkness like a black ribbon. Somewhere a dog barked, and the sound echoed against stone as if the world itself were too large to comfort. I thought of Valeria in the chapel, the stained glass burning around her like a halo of forbidden color. I thought of my brother's laughter at the council table, too loud, too easy. I thought of my mother's precise tears, and I understood with a slow chill that I had been crowned into a family that loved the throne more than it loved the person who sat upon it. My silence had always protected me, but now it felt like the first brick in a wall that would one day trap me inside while the kingdom burned outside. In the days after my first council, the palace began to treat me like a problem that required a solution. It was subtle at first, a misplaced invitation, a delayed report, a servant reassigned without explanation, nothing that could be accused, nothing that could be punished. Only the steady, patient pressure of hands trying to shape me into something more convenient. At breakfast, the great hall was dressed like a celebration, even when there was none. The long tables gleamed with silver bowls of blood-red pomegranates sat beside pale pears and honeyed figs. Carafes of wine caught the morning sun and threw rubies across the linen. Musicians played softly from the gallery. Their notes floating like perfume, and still beneath the beauty I felt watched, Seraphine arrived in a gown the color of fresh emeralds, the bodice embroidered with golden vines that climbed her, ribs and throat like living things. She wore her crown of braids pinned with tiny sapphires, and when she moved, the stones caught the light as if her hair held captive stars. "My king," she said, as she approached, and her voice was sweet enough to be dangerous. "My sister," I replied, rising. She kissed my cheek with the delicacy of ceremony, then sat too close, her perfume curling around me, like a promise. Her smile lingered as though we were alone, as though we were children again, running through summer gardens, untouched by duty. Then her eyes shifted just slightly to the dais, where my mother sat with her court ladies. Composed and gleaming, Seraphine's hand rested on my wrist. "You are becoming a stranger," she murmured. "I am becoming king," I said. "You were king the moment father stopped breathing," she replied, the sweetness cracking. "Now you are becoming something else, cold, remote." Lucien swept in late, as if time itself should adjust to his whims. His coat was blue velvet, deep as midnight, and it made his pale throat and silver eyes look even more striking. He bowed with exaggerated grace, then kissed my mother's hand, with all the charm of a man who had never been denied anything. "Forgive me," he said, smiling at the room as though it were an audience. "The stables needed my attention." My mother's mouth curved, but not into warmth. How noble. Lucien's gaze slid to me. "Brother, you look as if you have swallowed a storm." "I have swallowed your kingdom," I answered, and the words came out sharper than intended. His smile widened, and for a moment it almost looked proud. "Good. Perhaps it will finally teach you to roar." Seraphine's fingers tightened on my wrist. "Do not encourage him," she warned Lucien, though her eyes never left mine. "He will take you seriously." Lucien laughed, a bright sound that drew glances from half the hall. Then he leaned close enough for me to see the fine line of a scar at his temple, a remnant of childhood recklessness. "They want more than your decisions," he said quietly, the charm lowering into something intimate. "They want your heart displayed on the table. They want to see you bleed." Before I could answer, my mother's voice cut through the conversation like a bell. "We will speak privately after breakfast," she said to me. "Not a request." In the solar, Seraphine's hand slipped away. Lucien straightened, his expression smoothing into courtly ease. The musicians continued, unaware that the air had changed. I ate little. The food tasted like obligation. In the solar, my mother dismissed the ladies with a graceful wave. When the door closed, the room seemed to shrink around us. Light spilled through, stained glass, painting her in violet and gold. She sat in her window seat, hands folded in her lap, every inch of her composed, regal sorrow. "You defied Varric," she began. "I prevented him from squeezing the people," I replied. Her gaze remained calm. "Varric squeezes where he is." Told that landed with a quiet weight. "Are you telling him?" A pause, not long enough to be obvious, long enough to be felt. "I am telling you that men like Varric do not move without certainty that someone will protect them. And you are protecting him." "I am protecting the throne," she corrected, her tone sharpening. "The throne does not survive on ideals. It survives on alliances, on control, on fear used carefully." Took a slow breath. "You did not call me here to Discuss granaries? No, she said. I called you here to discuss your weakness. The word was spoken as if it were a medical diagnosis. I felt my jaw tighten. My restraint is not weakness. It is when it makes you unpredictable, she replied. The court cannot read you. The council cannot use you. That is why they are restless. And what would you prefer? I asked, keeping my voice even. A king who is easy to use? I would prefer a king who understands that being used is sometimes the price of being obeyed, she said, and her eyes flashed. Your father understood that. The comparison struck hard. I looked away toward the city beyond the glass. Smoke rose in thin threads from chimneys. Ordinary life carried on beneath our drama. You speak of father as if he were flawless, I said. My mother's expression softened, a practiced softness. I speak of him as if he were necessary. She stood, gliding toward me in a gown of midnight velvet. Up close, I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The places grief had tried to claim her and failed. She touched my cheek with fingers cool as porcelain. You carry his face, she whispered. That is your greatest weapon and your greatest danger. People will look at you and decide you must be him again. I cannot be him. You must be better, she said, voice turning cold. And you must be married. The word hit me like a slap. I have been king for weeks, I said, and already you have made enemies, she replied. A marriage will bind allies to you. It will quiet the court. It will silence their questions. You mean it. Will silence me, I said. Her hand fell away. Do not be dramatic. But my blood was rising now. Anger and something darker beneath it. Who is it? I demanded. Which bride have you chosen to dress me in like a doll? She watched me carefully, as if weighing how much truth to give. Lady Celeste of Revel. The name settled into the room heavy as a stone. Celeste was famous, even beyond our borders. Golden-haired, pale-eyed, bred for diplomacy. House Revel controlled the southern ports. Their ships fed our coffers. Their soldiers were trained like machines. To marry Celeste would be to lock the kingdom's trade, roots into our hands, and to lock my life into a cage lined with gold. I will not, I said. My mother's gaze sharpened. You will. I am king. I replied the same words, but now they tasted bitter. And I am the woman who kept your father's court from devouring itself for 25 years, she said, stepping closer. Do not mistake your crown for freedom. It is a chain. It has always been a chain. I thought of Valeria then, with sudden aching clarity, the way her eyes held, steady, the way her voice had spoken of change as if it were possible. Forbidden love had not yet become love. It was still an ember, but I felt the heat of it burning beneath my ribs. I will decide whom I marry, I said. My mother's smile was small and pitying. Then decide quickly, because your brother is deciding too. I went rigid. What do you mean? Ellawen's son, she said softly, and for the first time there was something like warning in her voice. Lucien has been seen often with Celeste. A coldness crept through me. Seen? In gardens, in galleries, in places where servants have eyes, she replied. He is charming. Her, perhaps to amuse himself, perhaps to undermine you, perhaps both. Lucien's laughter at breakfast returned to me, bright as a blade. I imagined him beside Celeste, handsome, radiant, attentive, making her feel chosen, making her feel powerful, making her forget she was a political coin, and I imagined the court whispering, "Lucien would make the better king." "He would not," I said, but the words were more prayer than certainty. My mother's gaze did not soften. "He is ambitious, and ambition is a kind of hunger that does not die easily." I left the solar with my pulse pounding and my thoughts spinning. The palace corridors seemed narrower than before. The tapestries, weddings, coronations, battles felt like warnings. I found Corin outside my chambers, waiting as if he had sensed the storm. His eyes flicked over my face. "They have spoken to you," he said. "My mother has," I replied. "She wants me married." Corin's expression tightened. "To whom?" "Celeste of Revel." He exhaled slowly. "Then the throne is tightening its grip. And Lucien," I added, forcing the words out, "is courting her." Corin's gaze sharpened. "That is not courtship. That is strategy." "Or cruelty," I said, and my voice surprised me with its bitterness. Corin hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There are whispers beyond the palace, not only about marriage, about your father." I went still. "What whispers?" "That his death was convenient," Corin said, barely above a murmur. My throat tightened. "That is treason. It is gossip," Corin corrected. "And gossip is how treason learns to walk without chains." I stared at the carved door of my chambers, suddenly aware that walls did not keep secrets. They only gave them corners to breed. "In who says it? Men who drink too much," Corin replied. "Women who pretend not to hear, and one name is repeated often, Chancellor Varick." I felt anger flare hot and clean. "Varick would not dare." Corin met my gaze. "Varick dares because someone shields him." My mother's words echoed. "Men like Varick do not move without certainty. Someone will protect them." The palace was glittering, perfumed, bright with jewels and silk, and beneath it I began to see the rot more clearly. It was not a single enemy, it was a web. It was family. It was love twisted into leverage. That night I did what I should not have done. I left my chambers without escort, cloaked in dark. Wool moving through the palace like a rumor. The chartered chapel of St. Aureline was lit again with candles, their flames trembling. The stained glass above still held its riot of colors, scarlet, sapphire, emerald, casting them onto the stone. Floor like spilled treasure. Valeria was there as if summoned by the same ache. She turned when she heard my steps, and her face softened in recognition before she remembered who I was and what that meant. She curtsied, but there was defiance in it, a refusal to be reduced to fear. "Your Majesty," she said, and I heard the careful distance she tried to place between us. "Valeria," I replied, and the simplicity of her name felt like rebellion. "You should not come here alone," she warned, eyes flicking toward the shadows. "This palace has too many ears." "I came because the palace has too many voices," I said, stepping closer. The candlelight gilded her hair, made her eyes look darker, deeper, and I needed one that did not sound like a threat. Her breath caught, just slightly. "Do you think I am not a threat?" "You are," I admitted. "That is why you are dangerous." She held my gaze, and in that look there was something achingly human, fear, longing, caution, and a spark of anger at the world that demanded she deny all of it. "You are being pushed," she said quietly. "I can see it in your face. They push you toward a marriage you do not want." I swallowed, my pride resisting confession, my heart demanding it. "They push me toward a life that is not mine." "And you will let them?" she asked. The question struck at the center of me. I thought of my mother's cold certainty. I thought of Lucien's charm turning into a weapon. I thought of Verrick's smooth smile and the whispered accusations about my father's death. I have ruled. In silence, I said, the words tasting like ash. I thought silence would keep me safe. Valeria stepped closer. The scent of her was not heavy. Perfume, but clean herbs and candle wax. Something honest. Silence keeps you alone, she murmured. The space between us narrowed until I could feel the warmth of her skin. My hand lifted, not quite, touching her cheek, hovering as if the air itself might burn me. This is forbidden, she whispered, voice trembling with restraint. I know, I said, and my voice broke on the truth, and yet I cannot. Look away. Her eyes glistened not with tears, yet but with feeling held too tightly. If you take even one step toward me, she said, they will use it against you. And if I do not, I replied, I will become exactly what they want. A king with no heart. For one heartbeat we were only a man and a woman standing beneath colored light, both of us aching, both of us frightened, both of us stubborn. Then footsteps echoed, somewhere beyond the chapel doors. Valeria stiffened. I lowered my hand, my pulse roaring. The footsteps paused, a faint murmur, the scrape of metal against stone. Someone was outside, listening, watching. In that moment I understood how betrayal begins, not with swords, not with open rebellion, but with the quiet certainty that someone has placed their eyes on your most vulnerable truth and is already deciding how to sell it. The footsteps did not enter the chapel. They lingered. That was worse. Valeria and I stood in the fractured light of the stained glass, our shadows thrown together across the stone floor. Like a confession already written, I could hear my own pulse loud in my ears, and beneath it the faint rasp of someone shifting weight beyond the doors. Not a servant. Servants shuffled. This was deliberate. Valeria stepped back first. The movement was small, but it felt like the snapping of a thread pulled too tight. You must go, she whispered. So must you, I replied, her chin lifted, a flash of defiance cutting through the fear. If they find you here, they will ruin me. They will not, I said automatically. She held my gaze. They will. There it was again, the truth I could not protect her from. The crown on my head could command armies, but it could not shield one. Woman from scandal. The footsteps faded at last, retreating down the corridor, not hurried, not guilty, certain. We were being warned or measured. I left first, pulling my cloak tighter. Around me, every sense sharpened. The palace. Corridors were dim at that hour, lit by torches that painted the walls in restless gold. The tapestries seemed to move as I passed. Hunts, frozen mid-chase, lovers forever suspended in embroidered embrace. At the end of the gallery, a figure stood near a window overlooking the inner courtyard. Lucia. He did not turn immediately. He was looking down at the fountain below, where moonlight pooled in the water like spilled silver. His posture was relaxed, one shoulder leaning against stone, hands clasped behind his back. Brother, he said without looking at me, you walk late. So do you. He smiled faintly. I could not sleep, neither could I. But the reason in his voice was not unrest, it was anticipation. He finally turned, and the torchlight caught his features. Handsome, open, infuriatingly composed. His eyes scanned my face, slow and searching. You, Look flushed, he observed. I was in the chapel. Praying, he asked lightly. Thinking. Lucien pushed away from the wall and approached me with the casual grace of a man who had never been. Denied entry anywhere, he stopped close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the faint scar near his temple. You must be careful what you think about, he murmured. The walls have begun to lean inward. I studied him. Were you outside the chapel? A pause, perfectly measured. I passed by, he said. I heard voices. And you stayed. His lips curved. Would you have preferred I interrupted? Anger flared, sharp and humiliating. You enjoy this? Enjoy? What? He asked, spreading his hands as if innocence was stitched into his skin. The spectacle, I said. The suggestion. Lucien's expression shifted just slightly. The charm thinned. Do not mistake me, he said, voice lowering. I do not care who you pray with, but others will, such as, he tilted his head. Varric, Uncle Halric, mother. The word mother hung between us like a blade. You think she sent you? I asked quietly. Lucien laughed, but there was no warmth in it. She does not need to send me. I see enough on my own. His gaze sharpened. Valeria Marwyn is beautiful, even I can admit. That something in my chest tightened. Leave her. Name out of your mouth. He smiled slowly. So it is true. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You will not touch her. Lucien's brows rose. Amused. Touch her. You speak as if she belongs to you. She does not belong to anyone, I snapped. Exactly, he replied softly. The silence between us was no longer brotherly. It was territorial. You think this is about love, Lucien said, his voice almost gentle. It is not. It is about perception. A king entangled with the daughter of a disgraced house? The court will not see romance. They will see weakness. They will see manipulation. And what do you see? I demanded. He met my eyes, and for a heartbeat I saw something raw there. Envy, perhaps, or fear. I see a brother who has always been too quiet, he said, and I see men circling him. The courtyard, fountain below, splashed softly, indifferent to us. Lucien stepped back. Be careful, he said. If you will not roar, someone else will. He left me, standing alone in the corridor, the torches hissing quietly as they burned. By morning, the whispers had found structure. At council, Chancellor Varric's robes were an immaculate, cream embroidered with golden lions, his beard trimmed to perfection. He looked every inch the loyal servant of the crown. Your Majesty, he began smoothly. A delicate matter has reached my ears. I did not react. Speak. There are rumors, he continued, folding his hands, that House Marwyn seeks to regain influence through personal proximity. The word proximity was a blade wrapped in silk. Marshal Dane frowned. What are you implying? Varric's smile remained. Apologetic. Only that certain meetings have been observed, late hours, private settings. My uncle, Halric, leaned back, rings glinting. We all know what that means. I felt every eye in the chamber turn toward me. Are you accusing me? I asked. Varric, my voice calm. I would never accuse my king, he replied quickly. I merely warn. The people are restless. They question your father's death. They question the treasury. They question the granaries. If they begin to question your judgment in matters of the heart, he let the sentence trail. There it was. The attack did not come as a shout. It came as concern. House Marwyn has been loyal since their rebellion, I said. evenly. Loyal under watch, Halric corrected, lazily. There is a difference, Marshal Dane's jaw tightened. This is gossip. Gossip becomes banners, Varric said quietly, and banners become war. The word war shifted the room's temperature. I leaned forward slightly. If anyone has evidence of treason from House Marwyn present, it now no one spoke. Then this discussion ends, I said. Varric bowed his head. As you wish, Majesty. But his eyes gleamed after counsel. I was intercepted not by my mother, but by Seraphine. She stood in the colonnade, sunlight blazing around her like a halo of gold. Her gown today was crimson silk, vivid and unapologetic, making her look almost dangerous against the pale stone. You are reckless, she said without preamble. I am careful, I replied. You are visible, she corrected, and that is worse. Her beauty was undeniable. Strong brows, sharp cheekbones, lips always on the verge of either a kiss or a curse. People underestimated her because she smiled. You think I do not hear things? She continued. Ladies whisper in galleries, servants exchange glances. Valeria's name has become currency. She has done nothing wrong, I said. Seraphine's gaze softened just a fraction. That has never protected a woman. The words struck deeper than she intended. You care for her, she said quietly. I did not answer. That is unfortunate, she murmured. For whom? I asked. For all of us, she replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Lucienne is being encouraged. By whom? Uncle Halric, she said, and others. They speak of his charisma, his decisiveness, his ease with the people, and my lack of those qualities, I finished. She did not deny it. They say father favored you out of habit, she continued carefully, not conviction. The world seemed to tilt. That's a lie, I said. Is it? She asked gently. He tested you constantly. He praised Lucien openly. Lucien needed praise, I snapped. I needed preparation. Seraphine's eyes searched mine. Or perhaps he was preparing both of you. The implication was clear. 2 sons, 1 throne. And you? I asked her. Where do you stand? She smiled faintly, but it did not reach her eyes. I stand where survival is possible. Before I could press her further, a commotion erupted at the far end of the courtyard. Shouts, the metallic clash of armor. A guard ran toward us, breathless. Your Majesty, riders from the western marches. My pulse spiked. What of them? They bring news, he panted. Villages burned. Banners sighted across the border. War, the word that Varric had dropped like a stone into the council chamber, now rose like smoke on the horizon. I moved immediately toward the gates. The riders were coated in dust, their horses lathered, eyes wild. One dismounted and fell to his knees. Before me, they fly the sigil of Lord Armand, he gasped. Black stag on silver, he gathers men. He says the crown is weakened. The accusation echoed in my skull. Why now? Demanded. The rider hesitated. They say, the king is distracted. Behind me, I felt the weight of watching eyes, courtiers gathering, servants whispering, my siblings somewhere in the crowd, distracted by love, by scandal, by silence. I straightened, letting my voice carry across the courtyard. Send word to the northern garrisons, double patrols along the river. Marshal Dine is to assemble a war council at once. The rider bowed his head. Yes, Majesty. As the courtyard erupted into motion, I caught sight of Lucian standing beneath the archway, his expression unreadable, not frightened, not surprised, almost ready. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that look I felt it clearly for the first time. Not merely rivalry, not merely ambition, but calculation. War was coming, and someone within these walls had decided it would be useful. Dawn arrived without mercy. The sky was a pale, unforgiving silver when Lucian and I rode through the eastern gates, armor catching the first shards of light. The courtyard was lined with soldiers in polished breastplates, their faces young, resolute, afraid, banners snapped in. The cold wind, crimson and gold against a sky that promised nothing. The people had gathered beyond the outer walls. They cheered. They always cheer before they understand the cost. I sat tall in the saddle, my war cloak heavy against my shoulders, the weight of the crown replaced by the weight of steel. Lucian rode at my right, radiant in dark, armor chased with silver, his presence magnetic. He lifted his hand once to the crowd, and a fresh wave of sound rose like fire. He was made for this, or perhaps war was made for men like him. We rode for 3 days through frozen fields and silent villages. Smoke scarred the horizon in thin, black lines. The first burned hamlet we reached was no more than charred beams and collapsed roofs. Snow had fallen lightly over the wreckage, turning ruin into something almost gentle. Almost. A child's shoe lay in the road, half buried. Dain dismounted beside me. Armand is testing response. Time, he said grimly. He strikes, withdraws, waits. Lucien surveyed the damage, jaw tight. Then we do not wait. His decisiveness stirred the soldiers. I felt it ripple outward, confidence, attaching itself to him like a banner. That night, in the command tent, maps were unrolled again, this time weighted by daggers instead of ivory. Lions! The air smelled of leather, smoke, and sweat. We push west at first light, Lucien urged. Hit the ridge before Armand expects resistance, and leave supply lines exposed. Dain countered. Lucien's eyes flashed. Hesitation is what he counts on. I watched them, the tension between caution and aggression tightening like a drawn bow. What would you suggest? Lucien asked. Me finally, all eyes turned. This was the moment they would remember later. The quiet king, or the decisive one. We split the advance, I said, slowly. Dain secures the ridge with the main force. Lucian takes the cavalry through the southern pass and cuts off retreat. Lucien's brows lifted. You trust me with the flank? I trust you with the enemy, I replied. Flicker, approval, challenge passed between us. The plan was set. Battle came faster than expected. Armand's men were not scattered raiders, but disciplined ranks, their black stag banners stark against the white fields. The clash was brutal, immediate, steel on steel, horses screaming, snow turning red in violent blossoms. I fought, not as a symbol, not as a shadow. I fought because if I did not, they would see it. Lucian was everywhere at once, shouting orders, cutting down a standard bearer, rallying faltering men with raw force of presence. He looked almost exultant in the chaos, alive in a way court had never allowed. When Armand's line finally broke and his forces scattered into the forested hills, the cheer that rose from our soldiers was hoarse and desperate. Victory, partial, fragile, bloody. We lost more men than I had calculated. We held the ridge. Lucian rode back toward me, helm removed, hair damp with sweat, a streak of blood across his cheek that was not his own. "You see," he said, breathless, "strength." I looked at the fallen behind him. "Cost." His expression hardened slightly. "There is always cost." That night word was sent back to the capital. We had driven Armand from the ridge. The western villages would have breathing room. But war does not end because one side inhales. 3 days later, a courier arrived. Under cover of dusk, his horse collapsed at the edge of camp. The message bore the royal seal. I broke it with gloved hands. The capital was restless. Protests over grain shortages, whispers spreading that the king had abandoned the city. Rumors that the Marwin girl had been seen meeting with foreign envoys. Valeria, my vision blurred for a moment. "She would not," I murmured. Lucien stood across from me in the lamplit tent. "What is it?" I handed him the parchment. He read quickly, jaw tightening. "Convenient," he said. "For whom?" I asked. "For anyone who wishes to divide your attention," he replied. My chest felt hollow. "They accuse her of treason. They accuse her of influence," he corrected. I looked at him sharply. Lucien met my gaze steadily. "You underestimate how visible you are." "Did you know?" I asked, quietly. His eyes flickered just slightly. "No." "What?" "That this would happen." A beat of silence. "I knew they would look for leverage," he said at last. "Is she leverage to you?" I pressed. Something flashed in his expression. Anger, perhaps. Wounded pride. "Do you think I would endanger the kingdom for spite?" "I do not know what you would endanger it for," I replied. The words hung between us like frost. Another courier arrived. Before dawn, this one carried worse news. A fire had broken out in the southern quarter of the capital. Granaries damaged, riots escalating. Varric urging emergency powers in the king's absence. Emergency powers. Lucien read the second message, face darkening. "He moves quickly. He moves as if prepared," I said. Lucien looked at me for a long moment. "We return," he said. "And abandon the western line?" Dane demanded. "When told. We leave a garrison," Lucien insisted. "If the capital falls into chaos, Armand wins without lifting a blade." I felt the weight of decision rushing inward. If I stayed, the city might tear itself apart. If I returned, Armand could regroup and strike deeper. The tent felt too small. Outside, soldiers laughed around fires, unaware of how thin the thread truly was. I stepped away from the table, breathing hard. I had ruled in silence. I had believed restraint would steady the throne. And now the kingdom burned in two directions at once. Flame in the west, unrest in the heart. Valeria's name dragged through rumor. Varric, gathering power. My mother navigating the court, like a queen who had never truly relinquished her grip. "Say it," Lucien said quietly behind me. "Say what?" "That you cannot hold everything," he replied. I turned slowly. His face was no longer triumphant, no longer radiant. It was strained, human. "We were raised to compete," he said, "for father's approval, for the court's favor, for breath itself. But this," he gestured vaguely to the maps, the letters, the distant fires. "This is larger than that." "Is it?" I asked. He stepped closer. "If you believe I want the throne at the cost of ashes, you do not know me at all." I searched his face for deceit. I saw ambition. I saw pride. But I also saw something else, fear. Before I could respond, a third rider arrived. This one bearing a sigil I did not recognize. Not a Merns. not ours. The parchment inside was sealed with dark green wax. House Marwyn. My pulse stuttered. I broke the seal. The letter was written in a hand I knew. They have taken me. The words were simple, no flourish, no panic. I'm held within the old South Tower under guard. They claim it is for my protection from whom do not return for me, she had written. That is what they want. The ink blurred where her hand must have hesitated. Trust no one who smiles too easily. I felt something inside me fracture. Lucien read over my shoulder. South Tower, he repeated softly. In the capital, I said. They cage her, he said. For my obedience, I replied. The emotional collapse did not come as tears. It came as clarity. This war was not only at the borders, it was inside my own walls, inside my own blood. I looked at Lucien. If we ride back, I said, voice low and steady, we do not ride as princes. We ride as men prepared to tear rot from the heart of our own court. His jaw tightened. And if the rot wears our mother's face? He asked. The question struck like a blade. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, whatever softness had lived there was gone. Then we cut. Carefully, I said. Outside, the wind howled across the camp, scattering sparks into the night. The kingdom burned, and for the first time I was no longer certain which fire would consume us. First, we rode through the night. No banners, no fanfare. Only a small detachment of our most loyal cavalry, armor dulled with ash to avoid catching. Moonlight. The capital's towers rose against the horizon like dark teeth, jagged and waiting. As we approached, I saw it. Smoke, not the thick, rolling black of siege, but thin, constant threads, rising from multiple quarters, controlled fires, contained chaos, engineered unrest. The eastern gate opened at our signal. The captain on duty knelt, but his eyes flickered, surprised, perhaps unsettled. We were not told you were returning, Majesty. I did not ask to be announced, I replied. Lucien dismounted beside me, gaze sweeping the inner walls. How many guards are assigned to the South Tower? The captain hesitated. Twice the usual number. For what reason? Orders from Chancellor Varick, he said. Carefully. Protection of sensitive persons. Sensitive. Lucien and I exchanged a look. The palace courtyard, once radiant with ceremony, now fell taut. Torches burned brighter than necessary. Guards stood closer together. Servants moved. Quickly, eyes lowered. Fear had structure now. We did not remove our armor. We went directly to the South Tower. It stood apart from the main palace. Complex older stone, narrower windows, once used for foreign dignitaries, later for less comfortable guests. Two guards crossed halberds at the entrance when they saw us. By order of the Chancellor, one began. Lucien stepped forward. First, by order of the king, he said calmly. Move. They hesitated. That hesitation would be remembered. I stepped beside my brother. If you require clarification, I said evenly, I will provide it after you are relieved of duty. They lowered their weapons. Inside, the air was colder. The corridors curved tightly, torchlight struggling against thick walls. Footsteps echoed. Upward in spirals we climbed. Halfway up we encountered Varick. He descended with deliberate composure, cream robes immaculate despite the hour. He did not appear surprised. Majesty, he said smoothly, you honor us with your swiftness. You cage my people, I replied. You spread unrest. You petition for emergency powers, for stability, he corrected. Lucien's hand rested casually on the hilt of his sword. Release her. Varric's brows lifted faintly. Lady Valeria is under protective supervision. There have been threats against her person. From whom? I asked. He held my gaze. Those who believe she manipulates the crown. And you believe that? I pressed. I believe perception shapes reality, he replied. Your visible attachment to a Marwyn has emboldened certain factions. You mean you? Lucien said quietly. A flicker of irritation crossed Varric's face before the mask returned. You returned at a precarious moment, he said to me. The southern quarter demands grain. The nobles demand reassurance. Lord Halric proposes a temporary regency until what? I asked. Softly, until the unrest is contained. Regency. The word settled like a guillotine. Lucien's fingers tightened slightly on his sword. You moved quickly, he said. I moved responsibly. Varric replied, in your absence. My absence was 3 days, I said. In times of uncertainty, Varric answered. 3 days is an eternity. Silence thickened between us. You will. Stand aside, I said at last. Varric studied me. Something in my expression must have shifted, because for the first time since I had known him, his confidence wavered. As you wish, Majesty, he said slowly. We passed him on the stairs. At the top level, a single iron-banded door waited. Beneath torchlight, I dismissed the remaining guards with a look. Lucien remained at my side. I opened the door. Valeria stood near the narrow window, moonlight cutting across her figure. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, unadorned. Her hair was unbound, falling over her shoulders like dark water. She did not look broken. She looked furious. When she saw me, relief flashed. Quick, bright, then hardened into restraint. You should not have come, she said immediately. I was already coming, I replied. Lucien remained just inside the doorway, watchful. They have questioned me, she said, about you, about the Western campaign, about conversations in the chapel. Did you answer? Lucien asked. She met his gaze without fear. I answered nothing. They could use. I stepped closer. Have they harmed you? No, she said. They prefer subtlety. Of course they did. Varric pushes for regency, Lucien said quietly. Valeria's expression darkened. Then he moves faster than I thought. You expected this? I asked. She exhaled slowly. My father warned me before he died. House Marwyn was spared after the rebellion because we were useful, but usefulness expires. And you believe Varric seeks to replace me, I said. He seeks control, she replied. If not you, then someone. Easier? Lucien's jaw tightened. The implication hung there. I looked between them, two people I loved in different ways, two possible betrayals. Why the South Tower? I asked. Valeria's eyes flicked toward the floor, then back to mine. Because beneath it lies the old council archive. Cold moved through me. The archive, records from my father's reign, financial ledgers, correspondence, military directives. What is he hiding? Lucien asked. Or what is he altering? Valeria corrected softly. The realization struck. All at once, the fires in the southern quarter, the grain shortages, the whispers about my father's death. If the records were changed, if debts, troop movements, or secret agreements were rewritten, history itself could be weaponized. I turned to Lucien. Seal the tower. He nodded once. and left without argument. Valeria stepped closer. To me. They want you reactive, she said quietly. Angry, impulsive, so you appear unstable. I am angry, I admitted. Yes, she said, but you are. Not unstable. Her hand hovered near mine, not touching yet. If you arrest Varric publicly, Halric will rally half the nobles. They will claim tyranny. And if I do nothing, I said, they will claim weakness. She held my gaze steadily. Then do something irreversible. The words echoed in the small chamber. Irreversible. I had spent my life avoiding irreversible acts. Silence had always been my shield. But silence had brought us here. Footsteps thundered on the stairs. Lucien returned, breath sharp. The archive doors were barred from within, he said. Clerks working at this hour, burning documents, burning. The kingdom was not only burning at its borders, it was burning its own memory. I moved without another word, down the spiral stairs, past the stunned guards, into the lower chamber where smoke thickened the air. Clerks scattered when they saw us. Stacks of parchment fed into braziers, wax, seals melting, ink curling into ash. Stop! I commanded. Some froze, others continued. Desperate, Lucien kicked over the nearest brazier, scattering embers across stone. Seize them, he barked to the guards who had followed. I strode toward the central table. There, half-burned, lay a ledger I recognized instantly. My father's private accounts. I flipped it open. Alterations. Recent ink over older entries. Payments redirected. Funds missing. And beneath it, a sealed letter bearing my father's signet. Broken. My pulse roared. I tore it open. The handwriting was unmistakable. If anything should befall me, unexpectedly investigate V. The rest was scorched. V. Varric or Valeria. The uncertainty struck like a blade. Lucien came to my side. What is it? I showed him, his face drained of color. Do you believe he meant Varric? Lucien asked. Who else? I demanded. But doubt had already begun its quiet work. Upstairs I could feel the palace holding its breath. If I accused Varric, and the letter meant something else, I would fracture the court beyond repair. If I hesitated, he would erase the rest. This was the point of no return. No more silence, no more waiting. I turned to the guards. Arrest Chancellor Varric, said, my voice carrying with iron clarity. Seal his chambers. Detain Lord Halric for questioning. No one leaves the palace without my command. Lucien's eyes locked with mine. Once spoken, it could not be undone. Above us, bells began to ring, not in celebration, in alarm. The palace was awake, and so was the reckoning. The bells did not stop. They rang through corridors of marble and gold, through galleries draped in silk, through chambers where nobles woke in confusion and fear. The sound rolled over the palace like a storm, breaking inside stone. Arresting a chancellor is not a quiet act. Varric did not resist. He stood in his private study when the guards entered, hands folded behind his back, as though he had been expecting them. Cream robes exchanged for darker silk, as if even he had sensed the mood shifting. When they brought him before me in the throne hall, he walked without chains. The court gathered quickly. They always do when blood is near. My mother stood to the right of the dais, dressed in severe black, her face unreadable. Seraphine stood beside her, luminous in silver gray, eyes sharp as glass. Lucien remained at the base of the steps, armored, still silent. and watchful. Valeria was not present. I had ordered her kept within guarded chambers, not as prisoner, but as protection. Whether she understood that distinction, I did not know. Varric bowed low. "Your Majesty," he said calmly, "this display is unnecessary." "You were burning royal archives," I replied. "Outdated documents." He corrected smoothly. "Irrelevant ledgers." I was preserving stability. "By erasing it," Lucian asked coldly. A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles. Varric's gaze shifted to my brother briefly, then back to me. "You returned to a city on the brink of riot, grain stores damaged, nobles whispering of weakness. I acted to consolidate authority. Authority that is not yours," I said. His eyes sharpened slightly. "Authority that protects the throne." There it was. Again, always the throne. "You petitioned for regency?" I continued. "As contingency," he replied, "should the king fall in battle." I did. "Not fall," I said. "No," he agreed softly. "You did not." The silence stretched. I descended the steps slowly until I stood only a few paces from him. "You altered my father's records," I said. His expression did not flicker. "I corrected financial mismanagement," he replied. "Mismanagement by whom?" I pressed. He held my gaze. "By a king who trusted too few and suspected too late." The words struck. "You imply treason." "Against my father," Lucian snapped. "I imply nothing," Varric said evenly. "I suggest that power, when concentrated in silence, creates blind spots. The accusation was deliberate. Silence. My silence." I withdrew the half-burned letter from my sleeve. "My father wrote this before his death," I said. "He warned of someone whose name begins with V." A ripple of tension moved through the hall. Varric's eyes flicked to the parchment. "And you assume that letter condemns me," he said. "Should I assume it condemns Valeria?" I countered. For the first time, something shifted in his composure. "You doubt her?" he asked quietly. The doubt had lived in me since I read the charred fragment. I hated him for sensing it. "My doubt is not your weapon," I said. He straightened slightly, then finished the letter. "Read it fully." "It was burned," Lucian said. "Convenient." Varric murmured. My mother's voice cut through the hall, calm and resonant. "Enough." All heads turned. Elowen descended from her position with slow, regal precision. She stopped beside me, not touching, but close enough that I felt the gravity of her presence. "This spectacle weakens us further," she said. "If you accuse your chancellor publicly without proof, you fracture the court beyond repair." "Proof was burning in the archive," Lucian said, "or being preserved from exposure," she replied coolly. Her gaze moved to Varric. "How long have you served this family?" she asked him. 27 years, he answered. "And in those years, have you ever betrayed the ground?" "No." She turned to me. "Decide carefully," she said softly, "because once you condemn him, you cannot uncondemn him." The hall held its breath. I looked at Varric, at my mother, at Lucian, at Seraphine, whose eyes betrayed nothing. Then I looked at the nobles, their fine fabrics, their jewels, their carefully arranged loyalties. They were not afraid of truth. They were afraid of instability, and instability was already here. "I will not condemn without certainty," I said at last. A murmur, relief from some, frustration from others. Varric inclined his head slightly. "But I continued, voice hardening, "you will be confined Pending full investigation, the archives will be restored. Independent auditors will examine every ledger. And if I find that you altered even one record to manipulate this court, I let the sentence hang. Varric's eyes darkened. As you wish, Majesty. He was escorted away. The hall exhaled, but the fracture remained. That night I went to Valeria. She stood near the window again, moonlight tracing her profile. When I entered, she turned slowly. "You did not execute him," she said. "No." "Do you regret it?" "I do not know." "Yet," I admitted. She studied my face. "You doubt me," she said quietly. The words landed without accusation. "I doubt everyone," I replied. She absorbed that. "Even yourself." "Especially myself." Silence settled between us, not empty, but heavy. "The letter," she said. "What did it say?" I told her. Her expression did not waver. "You think my name was there," she said. "I do not want to think so. But you do." The honesty in her gaze was almost unbearable. "My father met with your father before he died," she said carefully. "Privately." The world seemed to narrow. "About what?" "About Varric," she said, "and Halric." Cold clarity flooded me. "Why did you not tell me this before?" I demanded. "Because my father swore me to secrecy," she replied, voice breaking slightly. "And because I did not know if I could trust you." The words struck harder than any blade. "You could not trust me," I repeated. "You are a king," she said. "Kings protect thrones, not truths." Anger flared, then collapsed inward. Perhaps she was right. Lucian entered without ceremony, closing the door behind him. "The nobles are divided," he said. "Halric calls your decision weakness. Others call it restraint. And you?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "I call it dangerous," he said. "For whom?" "For you." The days that followed were chaos disguised as order. Audits began, guards reassigned. Halric placed under house watch. The southern granaries reopened under military supervision. The fires in the city dwindled. Armand, sensing disruption, pushed once more at the western border and was repelled decisively by Dane's forces. The kingdom did not collapse, but it did not heal. Whispers persisted about the letter, about Valeria, about whether I had protected love over loyalty. 1 week later, proof surfaced. Hidden within an unburned ledger, intercepted payments from Armand's envoys, routed through shell accounts overseen by Varric's personal clerks. The pattern was subtle, brilliant. He had funded both unrest and invasion. When confronted privately, he did not deny it. "You were too quiet," he said simply. "The kingdom needed movement, so you created war," I said. "I created urgency," he replied. "And in urgency, power consolidates." "For whom?" I demanded. "For whoever is bold enough to seize it," he said. He did not beg. When I signed the order for his execution, my hand did not tremble. The sentence was carried out at dawn. No spectacle, no speech, just finality. Halric fled before arrest could reach him. My mother withdrew into colder silence. Lucien stood beside me at the execution, not speaking. Afterward, as the sun rose pale and indifferent, he turned to me. "You have changed," he said. "Yes," I answered. "Into what?" "I do not know yet." Valeria came to me that evening. "No longer guarded. You chose the kingdom," she said. "I chose survival," I replied. "And us?" she asked. Softly, I looked at her, at the woman who had risked herself, who had withheld truths, who had forced me to confront my own doubt. I do not know how to choose you without endangering everything, I said. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Then perhaps you do not choose me, she said. The words were gentle, devastating. We did not part in anger, we parted in understanding. Lucien's popularity surged after the Western victories. He became the face of strength. I became the face of judgment. The kingdom stabilized, grain flowed. Again, borders held, but something had shifted. Permanently inside the palace, trust had been burned along with the archives. Years later, historians would say I ruled firmly, that I preserved the dynasty, that I avoided civil war. They would not write about the nights I stood alone on the balcony, watching lanterns flicker across the city, wondering whether silence had saved us or simply changed the shape of the fire. I ruled in silence while the kingdom burned, and when the flames were finally contained, I discovered that some ashes never wash away. The throne endured, my family endured, but love once sacrificed to legacy does not return unchanged. It becomes memory, and memory is the heaviest crown of all.